Now, in Australia, do you know about the dingo fence? In Australia, there is a fence in the south that goes for a couple thousand miles, and it's actively guarded. And first they were saying that it's to keep the dingoes out, these wild dogs, and actively guarded to keep the dog. Who? What? And then they were saying, well, they did nuclear testing out there and they don't want anyone to go out there. Boom, red flag. What's going on there?
All right. Let's just clear the decks here. Okay. First of all, yes, the dingo fence in Australia actually exists. Amazingly, DIRTH said something accurate. It's not only real, it's one of the longest structures in the world, but actively guarded?
Actively guarded to keep the dog. Who? What?
Yeah, DIRTH, that's what I thought too. Spoilers, it isn't. Somehow, after 2 base hits in a row, DIRTH's taking a big old touchdown hockey swing and struck out. Also, I don't know how baseball works. There were nuclear tests performed here in Australia in the 1950s, but Dave's run his red flag up the pole a little prematurely. I'm pretty sure it's not the first time he would have had that particular problem. Anyway, just in case there might be some top secret reason for this fence to exist that I'm unaware of, I reached out to my good friend and fellow Avenger, Mike, from the Drunk Debunk show to ask him a simple question. So, Mike, what are 3 reasons that one might build a massively long, enormous fence right through the outback?
Well, DP, there's several explanations, but the 3 that I can think of that would be the most practical are that it was most likely the world's most ambitious property line dispute. Some bloke probably had a neighbor who kept borrowing his lawnmower or something and never returned it, so he thought, I'll show him proper boundaries. 5,600 kilometers sends a very clear message about personal space. And another, I guess it'd be like a wildlife traffic management system. Kangaroos have absolutely no road sense whatsoever. They just hop wherever they please, dude. No regard for designated travel lines. This fence creates proper kangaroo corridors, preventing chaos and ensuring orderly hopping patterns across the entire continent. And I guess the third one is a continental scale washing line. Australia does get a lot of sun, and when you got that much drying capacity, why waste it? You probably fit like every single tea towel in the southern hemisphere on that. And it's just good resource management.
After getting Mike's input, I realized he was going to be absolutely no help with this one whatsoever. So I've done a little bit of deep research on my own. That's right, I've done my own research. The dingo fence wasn't built to stop people from discovering any forbidden truths or to keep them away from nuclear testing sites, although that actually might have been a pretty good idea. It was built for something far more sinister. Bloody dogs. Dingoes. And they were absolutely decimating Australia's sheep industry. We're talking tens of thousands of animals killed every year. Entire flocks wiped out overnight, like a woolly massacre. In South Australia alone, farmers were losing over 20,000 sheep a year. That is an economic gut punch. And without something drastic, the sheep industry, particularly in the arid regions, was going under. So what did these hardened outback graziers do? They built fences. Hundreds of kilometres of them. Patchwork lines of posts and wire meant to keep dingoes the hell out. These started popping up in the 1880s, originally just to block rabbits, but they quickly realised, hey, this works on dingoes too. So farmers, often banding together, extended and joined their fences into longer and longer lines. By the 1940s, state governments got involved, particularly Queensland and South Australia, formalising what would eventually become the longest fence on Earth. Legislation came in, the Dog Fence Act in South Australia in 1946 and the Barrier Fence Act in Queensland in 1954. They were not mucking around. And by the mid-1950s, after decades of expansion and political pressure from sheep lobbyists and regional councils, the thing was fully linked, stretching from the Darling Downs in Queensland all the way down to the cliffs of the Nullarbor in South Australia. Over 5,600 kilometers of fence. That is longer than the Great Wall of China. It's probably not quite as well built as the Great Wall, but there's a very good reason for that. The fence isn't designed to stop invading armies, but it does repel some fluffy, toothy little buggers with a taste for lamb cutlets. And the best part is, it worked. One sheep station, Mullingarry, recorded 360 wild dogs shot on the unprotected side, compared to just 50 on the safe side behind the fence. That is a massive difference. There's no secret military operation here. There's no kind of cover-up. The dingo fence was just about survival. Now, you might well be sitting there thinking, but DP, come on, that was the past. We're talking about the modern era. Who's maintaining this so-called dog fence now? Is it the Illuminati? Do we have NASA, CIA agents running up and down this fence with cattle prods trying to keep people away? Do we have soldiers armed to the teeth from the military with orders to shoot anyone who approaches that fence on sight? No, we don't, can't. Not even close. What we do have are some good old-fashioned fence crews. We have a bunch of Aussies in dusty utes and overalls and probably slouch hats looking after the fence and doing all of the hard work. So as you kids like to say, let's break it down. In Queensland, which is northeast Australia, they've got the Wild Dog Barrier Fence Unit. It's a dedicated team of about 21 officers, and these guys aren't paper pushers. They're out there with dozers, graders and trucks, often living out bush for weeks at a time, welding mesh and replacing posts and keeping that line tight. Down a bit south in New South Wales, we've got the Wild Dog Destruction Board, and they patrol their 600-kilometre section twice a week. That's some serious commitment. They've got crews on standby for breakages or flood damage, any other general issues as well that might pop up. And in South Australia, my home state, we've got a dog fence board, and they oversee the biggest stretch of the fence, around 2,200 kilometres of it. The work's contracted out to landholders and local operators, many of whom live right next to the fence. This thing is literally a part of their lives. They carry at least 10 kilometres worth of spare fencing materials at each outpost, and they can repair kilometres worth of damage in a single day if needed. Now, for all of that, the annual cost in total is around 10 million Australian dollars across the 3 states. That's a lot of money, but remember the context here. Once those costs are split between the governments and the landholders, it's less than some sports stadiums spend on fireworks. So just to be clear, the fence is maintained meticulously, but it is not guarded. There are no snipers in guard towers keeping tourists away from DIRTH's little fantasy land. It's a fence made out of wire. You can literally see through it. If it's involved in keeping some sort of secret, it's rubbish. It is great for keeping dingoes out though. Who knew? Now, look, I almost let this one slide, but let's circle back around to possibly the dumbest thing Dare said at the start of the video.
Then they're saying, well, they did nuclear testing out there and they don't want anyone to go out there. Boom, red flag, what's going on there?
Yeah, because if there's one thing the Australian government's known for, it's building 5,000 kilometre plus fences to keep people away from their super secret, super stealthy, super quiet nuclear testing sites by placing a see-through fence absolutely nowhere near them. The United Kingdom conducted 12 major nuclear tests here in Australia between 1952 and 1957. These explosions occurred at the Montebello Islands, Emu Field, and Maralinga. The fences had already been going up, as we talked about, since the late 1800s, over 50 years before the nuclear tests happened. The Montebello Islands are off the coast of Western Australia. You would need a boat and a compass to get there, not a fence. As for Emu Field and Maralinga, they are tucked away in remote South Australia. It's the kind of place where your GPS says, yeah, good luck, mate. You don't need to sneak past the fence to get to these places either. The dingo fence has gates that you can open and close. In fact, the air highway, It's a public road and it takes you right past the southern tip of the Dingo fence. You have to go through the fence line, and you can. People do it every day. You can literally book a guided tour to Maralinga if you can. So respectfully, Dave, no. There's no covert operation out there, and the fence has absolutely nothing to do with nuclear testing. Like most of Australia, there is absolutely nothing out there, but it is awesome. But just for funsies, let's entertain DIRTH's delusions for just a moment. Let's imagine that the Dingo fence is a cover-up, a top secret, heavily guarded barrier to keep people away from something. To break down what that would actually require, I'm going to hand over to someone who has real-world, actual military experience and knowledge, as well as a world-class bullshit radar. So here's another founding member of the Derp Vengers, the one and only Dan from Unfornicated. And if you're not subscribed to Unfornicated, you should absolutely go and sort that out. In fact, pause this video right now, go to Unfornicated's channel, subscribe, and then come back and we can continue. Right. Awesome. Over to you, Dan.
Hey, thanks, DP. All right. So for those who don't know me, a quick credential check. My name is Dano, and I have a U.S. Navy signals intelligence background. So I actually know what classified military operations look like. Now, Dave thinks, and I use the term lightly, that there's a secret operation bigger than D-Day happening in Australia's backyard, and somehow the only person smart enough to figure it out is Dave. The professional in me is offended. The human in me needs rum. Now, first, every military unit needs a name. DP suggests we go with Dingo Elimination and Raid Prevention Unit, or DIRTH for short. Perfect. Okay, with that out of the way, let's see what it actually takes to guard 5,600 kilometers of fuck all in the middle of nowhere. To guard it properly, we would need guard towers every 10 kilometers, 561 of the bastards. Forward operating bases every 100 kilometers to house guard tower personnel. A massive sensor grid, thermal imaging, satellite communications, and enough drones to make Amazon jealous. Plus supply lines that somehow function in the middle of nothingness without the use of the Falcor Luck Dragon delivery service. We would also need quick reaction force hubs, helipads, airlift logistics, med centers, water purification, fuel storage, and enough satellite bandwidth to keep an Xbox working in the Nullarbor. Now, let's say only 1 in 5 towers is actively manned. That's still 110 towers needing around-the-clock coverage. That's 1,100 troops just standing around watching dirt. Then we got 56 forward operating bases, or FOBs, firehouse style, another 1,700 personnel. Let's say approximately 375 to 500 surveillance drones, which needs 750 operators. Mobile patrol teams covering the gaps, 336 more troops. QRF airlift teams scattered across the country, 200 more. And then there's maintenance, admin, logistics, medics, intel teams, and the poor bastard whose job is to explain to headquarters why the Wombat stole another set of night vision goggles. And that's another 1,500. Total active force, 6,100 troops, just to watch dirt. But here's the kicker. The Dingo fence runs through nowhere. These aren't suburban postings. They're not commuting from home. These troops are deployed, staged, rotated, and pulled out before they lose their minds to heat stroke or drop bears. With a sustainable Navy-style deployment rotation model, this hypothetical DIRP unit needs 18,000 to 20,000 total personnel. That is roughly 20 to 25% of Australia's entire military, including the Army, Navy, and Air Force combined. Let me put that in perspective. The Anzac landing at Gallipoli deployed 16,000 troops to take on the Ottoman Empire in World War I. Dave's fence would need more personnel than one of Australia's most famous military operations. And for what purpose? To stop Dave from discovering what tourists post on social media daily? Well, as if that wasn't absurd enough, let's talk money. Because unlike conspiracies, budgets actually exist. Salaries for 20,000 troops, $2 billion. Infrastructure costs, $750 million. Drones, sensors, towers, forward operating bases, $300 million. Vehicles and helicopter ops, $250 million. Logistics, comms, R&R, $800 million. Total annual cost, $4.1 billion Australian. That's billion with a B. That's 7% of Australia's total defense budget. This is more than space defense, the entire budget for intelligence agencies like ASIS and ASD, and more than what Australia allocates to military pensions and veteran support annually. So Dave's theory requires the Australian military to be simultaneously incompetent enough that some YouTuber exposed them, but competent enough to run a leak-proof operation involving 20,000 personnel for decades. Pick a lane, Dave. This isn't a secret military op. It's a $4.1 billion fever dream held together with kangaroo shit and pure delusion. All of this to guard a fence with gates that are sometimes open. Hey, DP, can you help clean this mess up with some real-world comparisons?
Holy crap. Now, let's compare that absurd fantasy to a real-life guarded border. Take the US-Mexico border. That's roughly 3,100 kilometers long, almost half the length of the Dingo fence, and even with walls, sensors, border patrol, drones, and billions being spent annually, people still cross it constantly. And that's with over 19,000 agents dedicated to the task of stopping them. Also, America, my fence is bigger than your fence. Just saying. So, let's review. The Dingo fence is real. It was built to stop wild dogs, not people or aliens or whatever the hell DIRTH is imagining. It's maintained by good people doing honest work. It's not hiding nukes or aliens or portals to the hollow earth. It isn't constantly guarded by the military, and even if it were guarded 24/7 to stop people, it'd be the dumbest, most expensive security decision in Australian history. But hey, maybe in DIRTH's head, all of that makes sense. Oh, and of course, just a quick reminder that Flat Earth Dave's app, the Sun, Moon, and Zodiac Clock app, is still a data leaking nightmare of epic proportions. It sucks. Get rid of it. We're going to end this video with a solemn tribute to the imaginary heroes of DIRTH. Their non-existent and entirely unnecessary bravery will live on forever. It will live on in our hearts, will live on in our minds, will live on the labels of imaginary jars of Vegemite forming part of an imaginary memorial in the middle of DIRTH's imaginary protected or restricted zone. Let's solemnly pay our respects.
In Australia, do you know about the Dingo fence? In Australia, there is a fence in the south that goes for a couple thousand miles, and it's actively guarded. And first they were saying that it's to keep the dingoes out, these wild dogs, and it's actively guarded to keep the dog. Who? What? And then they were saying, well, they did nuclear testing out there and they don't want anyone to go out there. Boom, red flag, what's going on there?